The water was rising faster than Elena Corvetti had calculated, cold and black as oil, swallowing her ankles, then her calves, creeping toward her knees with the patient hunger of something that had waited decades to reclaim what was stolen from it. Her daughter Sophia pressed against her side, 7 years old and shaking so hard her teeth chattered like castanets, and Elena thought, "This is how we die. Drowned in a flooded monastery I bought for $1 because I had nowhere else to go." The iron ring in the stone floor sat 3 feet ahead of them, just visible in the beam of her dying flashlight. Elena had noticed it an hour ago when they'd first descended into what the auction listing had called lower storage levels condition unknown. Buyer assumes all risk. She'd thought it was decorative, some remnant of the building's religious past. Now, with water climbing past her knees and Sophia crying softly against her ribs, that iron ring looked like their only chance. "Mama, I'm scared." Sophia's voice was small, swallowed by the sound of water rushing through cracks in ancient stone. "I know, baby. Hold on to me." Elena waded forward, each step a battle against current that pulled at her legs with invisible hands. The flashlight flickered. "Not now," she thought desperately. "Please, God, not now." Her fingers closed around the iron ring. It was cold, slick with algae or moss or centuries of neglect. She pulled. Nothing happened. She braced her feet against the slippery stone and pulled harder, throwing her weight backward until her shoulders screamed, and her vision went white at the edges. The ring moved. Just an inch, but it moved. Beneath it, hidden for longer than Elena had been alive, something ancient began to wake. 4 months earlier, Elena Corvetti had been someone different. She'd been a pastry chef at Bellissimo, one of the better restaurants in Providence, Rhode Island. Not the best, those belonged to James Beard winners and graduates of prestigious culinary schools in France, but good, solid. The kind of place where locals celebrated anniversaries and business people closed deals over tiramisu that Elena made fresh every morning at 4 a.m. She'd worked there for 9 years, ever since Sophia was born. Single mother, yes, but managing. Rent paid on time in their small apartment, 3 blocks from the ocean. Sophia, in a decent public school where the teachers knew her name and cared about her progress. A life that wasn't glamorous, but was theirs, built brick by brick through early mornings and late nights, and hands that smelled perpetually of vanilla and espresso. Then Bellissimo's owner, Antonio Russo, had a stroke, massive, debilitating. His nephew, Marco, flew in from New York within 48 hours, bringing lawyers and accountants and plans that had clearly been drawn up long before Antonio's brain had betrayed him. Marco had inherited everything, and Marco had different ideas about how to run a restaurant. Elena heard the news on a Tuesday morning while prepping chocolate mousse. Marco entered through the kitchen door wearing a suit that cost more than Elena made in a month, and gathered the staff with the casual authority of someone who'd never worried about money in his life. "New direction," he announced. "We're going upscale. Molecular gastronomy, farm to table, the whole 9 yards. Which means we need a new team. New chef, new concept, new everything." He smiled, like he was delivering good news. "You'll all get 2 weeks severance. Very generous, I think. Clean out your stations by Friday." Elena had stood there with chocolate-stained hands, hearing the words but not quite processing them. 9 years, 2 weeks severance. Just like that, the life she'd built began collapsing. She applied everywhere after that. Every restaurant, every bakery, every hotel kitchen in Providence and the surrounding towns. But it was January, the dead season for hospitality. Everyone was cutting back, not hiring. The applications that asked for references all wanted to know why she'd left Bellissimo, and when she answered honestly the place was sold, new owner brought in his own people, their faces would shift. That subtle change that meant they were already writing her off as someone else's problem. The rent came due. Then past due. The eviction notice arrived on thin paper that seemed deliberately cruel in its legal precision. 30 days to vacate. Elena read it 3 times, trying to find some loophole, some escape clause. There was none. She sold everything that wasn't essential. The furniture, the kitchen equipment she'd accumulated over years of loving her craft, Sophia's bike that the little girl had just learned to ride. Each sale felt like cutting away pieces of herself. The money bought them 45 more days in the apartment, then another week in a motel, then 3 nights in a budget place where the sheets smelled of bleach and strangers. Then that money ran out too. They slept in the car for the first time on a Wednesday in late February. Elena parked in a supermarket lot, engine running for heat until she got scared about carbon monoxide poisoning. Then they huddled under every jacket and blanket they owned, and Elena listened to Sophia's breathing and thought about all the ways she'd failed as a mother. The worst part wasn't the cold, or the hunger, or even the fear. The worst part was watching Sophia adapt, watching her daughter learn to brush her teeth in gas station bathrooms, to do homework by the car's dome light, to wake up each morning in a different parking lot and accept it as normal. Children were resilient, people said. Like that was a blessing. But Elena saw it as a tragedy that a 7-year-old should have to be resilient at all. 2 weeks into living in the car, Elena's Aunt Rosa called. Rosa was her father's sister, 73 years old, sharp as a tack, and the only family member Elena still spoke to after years of complicated history involving her father's drinking and her mother's early death. "I heard what happened with the restaurant," Rosa said without preamble. Elena had been parked outside a library, stealing their Wi-Fi. Marco Russo is a idiota. His uncle would be ashamed. "Yeah, well," Elena's voice came out flat. "Doesn't change anything. Where are you staying?" The lie formed automatically. "With a friend. Just temporary, until I find something." Rosa made a sound that suggested she knew exactly what temporary with a friend meant when your niece wouldn't give you an address. "Elena, listen to me. There's something you should know about. An opportunity, maybe. Or maybe just another problem. But you should look into it." "Rosa, I appreciate it, but I'm not really in a position to—" "Your grandfather owned property," Rosa cut through her protest. "Benito Corvetti. You never knew him, he died 2 years before you were born. But he left something in his will. A monastery." Elena almost laughed. "A monastery? Rosa, what would Grandpa be doing with a monastery?" "It's a long story. The short version is he bought it in 1962 for back taxes. $500. Thought he'd convert it into apartments, make some money. But the place was falling apart. Condemned by the city before he could do anything with it. Been sitting there 50 years. Just rotting." "Okay." Elena tried to find the relevance. "And this helps me how?" "The property is going to auction. Finally clearing the title after all these years of legal mess. Government surplus sale. Online auction. Ends tomorrow." Rosa paused. "Starting bid is $1. Elena sat up straighter in the driver's seat. $1? $1. Because it's worthless, Elena. The building is half underwater, sits on a tidal zone, where the ocean comes in. Condemned since 1967. No electricity. No plumbing that works. Probably full of mold and rats. The city just wants it off their books." "Then why are you telling me about it?" "Because you need shelter." Rosa's voice softened. "And because even a ruined monastery is better than sleeping in your car. Don't think I don't know, child. I can hear it in your voice." Elena's throat tightened. She looked at Sophia in the rearview mirror, curled up in the back seat doing math homework by the last of the daylight. "Rosa, look at the listing. That's all I ask. It's not much, probably not even safe, but it's 4 walls and a roof, and it's in your family. Benito never got to do anything with it, but maybe you can. Maybe there's something there worth saving. That night, after Sophia fell asleep in the reclined passenger seat, Elena pulled up the auction listing on her phone, watching the battery percentage drop as the page loaded with agonizing slowness. The photographs were terrible, clearly taken by someone who didn't care whether the property sold. Grainy shots of a stone building that looked more like a ruin than a structure, 3 stories tall with Gothic windows and a bell tower that tilted at an angle that suggested it might collapse in the next strong wind. The exterior walls were dark, with water damage and age, covered in ivy and moss that had taken over wherever human maintenance had failed. One photo showed the interior courtyard, flooded with several feet of standing water that reflected the sky like a dark mirror. Another showed what might have been a chapel, empty, except for debris and bird droppings. The wooden pews were long gone, probably scavenged or rotted away. The listing text was brutally honest. Former Street Clements Monastery, built 1847, condemned 1967. Structure sits in flood zone, with tidal influence lower levels subject to daily flooding. No utilities, no habitable certification, no warranty of structural integrity. Property sold AS, IS, where, IS. All inspections waiver required. Buyer assumes all risk and liability. Minimum bid, $1. Elena read it 3 times. This wasn't an opportunity. This was a joke. A condemned building in a flood zone with no power or water, probably dangerous to even enter. The kind of property the city was desperate to unload on anyone foolish enough to take it off their hands. But it was shelter. Maybe, potentially, if the upper floors were still dry and intact. She checked her bank account. $347. The last of everything they had. If she bid on this monastery and won, she'd have $346 left to survive on until she found work. If she didn't win, they'd still have $347 and nowhere to go. Elena looked at Sophia sleeping in the passenger seat. 7 years old. Should have been worried about multiplication tables and who sat with her at lunch, not where she'd sleep tomorrow night, or when they'd eat next. At 2:17 inches the morning, sitting in a Walmart parking lot with her phone at 8% battery, Elena placed a bid. $1. The auction closed at 6 a.m. When Elena woke, stiff and cold, neck aching from sleeping at an angle against the driver's side door, she checked her phone with hands that shook from more than just the February chill. You are the winning bidder. Congratulations on your purchase of Lot #48, St. Clements Monastery, 1847, Harbor Road, Providence, RI. She'd won $1, plus a $40 processing fee and $12 transfer fee. $53 total for a condemned monastery in a flood zone that would probably collapse on her head the first time she set foot inside. Sophia stirred in the passenger seat, blinking awake slowly. "Mama, where are we?" "Same place as yesterday, baby." Elena tried to smile. "But guess what? We're going to a new place today. A real building. With rooms. A apartment? Something like that." Elena didn't mention the part about it being a 170-year-old monastery that hadn't been inhabited since before Sophia's grandmother was born. It's going to be an adventure. The look on Sophia's face, hope, mixed with the weary skepticism of a child who'd been disappointed too many times, broke Elena's heart into smaller pieces than she'd thought possible. The property management office was in a strip mall in East Providence. Elena walked in at 9 a.m. sharp, Sophia's hand gripped tightly in hers, and approached a desk where a woman in her 50s typed without looking up. "I'm here about lot 4,872, the monastery." The woman's fingers paused. She looked up, taking in Elena's worn coat and the little girl beside her, and something like pity crossed her face. "You're the one who won that?" "I am." "Ma'am, did you read the listing? That property is condemned, in a flood zone, no utilities." "I read it." Elena kept her voice level. "I still bought it. I just need the keys and the paperwork." The woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed and pulled out a file folder. "You'll need to sign a liability waiver. The city is not responsible for any injuries or damages that occur on the property. You understand that building could collapse at any time?" "I understand. And that the lower levels flood daily with tidal flow, that there's no electricity or running water." "I understand." The woman pushed papers across the desk. Elena signed everything without reading, her signature getting looser and more desperate with each page. Finally, the woman handed over a single key on a plain metal ring. The exterior door still locks, somehow. Miracle the mechanisms haven't rusted through. She hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't know your situation, but that building isn't safe. If you're looking for shelter, there are programs." "I'll take my chances with the monastery." Elena closed her fingers around the key. It was heavy, old-fashioned, the kind that belonged in a Victorian novel. "Thank you for your concern." Outside, Sophia tugged on her hand. "Mama, what's a monastery?" "It's a place where monks used to live a long time ago, religious people who prayed a lot and lived very simply." "Is it pretty?" Elena thought of the photographs, the water-damaged stone and tilting bell tower and flooded courtyard. "It's old, baby, very old, but maybe we can make it nice." The drive to 1847 Harbor Road took them along the Providence waterfront, past functioning businesses and renovated warehouses converted into expensive lofts. Then the neighborhood declined sharply. Vacant lots appeared. Abandoned buildings with broken windows, the kind of area where development had started, made ambitious plans, then given up and moved elsewhere. Number 1,847 sat at the end of a dead-end street that turned into a dirt path overgrown with weeds. The monastery rose before them like something from a Gothic novel, 3 stories of dark stone that might once have been beautiful, but now just looked haunted. The bell tower did indeed tilt at a precarious angle. The windows on the ground floor were boarded over with wood, so old it had gone grey and soft-looking. Elena parked the car and sat staring at what she'd bought for $1. "It looks scary," Sophia whispered. "A little bit," Elena admitted. "But we're going to be brave. Okay, we're going to explore it together and see what we find." They approached the main entrance, a heavy wooden door set beneath a stone arch, carved with Latin words. Elena couldn't read. She fitted the key into the lock, half expecting it not to work. But the mechanism turned with surprising smoothness, and the door swung inward on hinges that shrieked like they were protesting being disturbed after decades of stillness. The interior was dark. Elena's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. They stood in what must have been the main chapel, a vast space with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. The floor was stone, covered in dust and debris, and small puddles where rain had leaked through the roof. The smell hit her immediately. Damp, stone, mold, decay, the accumulated scent of 50 years of abandonment. But the ceiling was intact. The walls stood firm, and when Elena looked up, she could see the architectural bones of something that had once been beautiful. Gothic arches, carved stone details, the remnants of craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore. "It's like a castle," Sophia breathed, her fear transforming into wonder. Children could do that. Find magic in ruins. Kind of. Yeah. Elena moved forward carefully, testing each step before putting her weight down. The stone floor seemed solid, despite the dust and puddles. Let's explore. Slowly. Very slowly. They found the courtyard next, accessed through a door at the back of the chapel. This matched the auction photos exactly, a rectangular space, maybe 50 feet long and 30 feet wide, surrounded by covered walkways supported by stone columns. The courtyard was flooded with about 3 feet of standing water that had a greenish tint and smelled of the ocean. As Elena watched, a small wave rippled across the surface, pushed by something she couldn't see. "Mama, why is there water?" "The ocean comes in." Elena remembered Rosa's warning about tidal zones. The building sits low enough that when the tide comes in, water gets inside. It's why no one wanted the property. She'd been hoping the flooding was exaggerated, something from years ago that might have been fixed. But no, this was active, daily flooding. The lower level was basically underwater. Living here would mean accepting that half the building was claimed by the sea twice a day. The covered walkways surrounding the courtyard were mostly dry. At least, Elena led Sophia along them, testing each section of floor before stepping fully onto it. Doors opened off the walkways. She counted 12 in total. Most led to small cells, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with stone floors and walls and narrow windows. Monk cells, she realized, where the religious men had slept and prayed and lived their simple lives. The cells on the ground floor were damp, water-stained, clearly unusable, but the stairway in the northwest corner led up to a second level, and there the cells were dry, dusty, filled with debris, but structurally sound. The stone walls were 2 feet thick, she could tell by the depth of the window alcoves, built to last centuries, insulated by sheer mass. "Mama, can we live here?" Sophia stood in one of the second-floor cells, her voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. Could they? Elena looked around, trying to see possibility instead of disaster. The space was about the size of their old bedroom in the apartment. No furniture, no electricity, no heat. But 4 walls, a ceiling, a door that closed, a window that looked out over the dead-end street toward the Providence waterfront in the distance. "I think we have to," Elena said honestly. "At least for now, until I can figure something else out." They spent the rest of the day bringing in their belongings from the car, the garbage bags full of clothes, the few kitchen items Elena had kept, Sophia's books and toys. It took 3 trips to get everything, and with each armload, Elena felt the weight of what they were doing settle heavier on her shoulders. This was it. This was home now. A condemned monastery in a flood zone, bought for $1 because she'd had no other options. The first night in the monastery, Elena lay awake on a blanket spread over the stone floor, listening to sounds she couldn't identify. Water moving somewhere below them, the tide coming in, filling the lower level, wind howling through gaps in the boarded windows. The building itself making noises as old structures do, creaks and groans and settling sounds that could have been anything from foundation shift to rats in the walls. Sophia pressed against her side, already asleep despite the strangeness of their surroundings. The little girl had adapted with the resilience of children, turning their situation into a camping adventure, pretending they were explorers in a castle. Elena stared at the dark ceiling and wondered if this was the worst decision she'd ever made or the only one that could save them. Morning came grey and cold. Elena woke to winter sunlight, filtering through the narrow window, painting geometric shapes across the stone walls. Her back ached from sleeping on the floor, her breath fogged in the frigid air. But they'd survived the night in a building with a roof and 4 walls, which was better than the car. They needed supplies, food, blankets, something to sleep on that wasn't bare stone. Elena had $294 left after paying for the monastery and putting gas in the car. She made a mental list. Sleeping bags from the discount store, non-perishable food that didn't need cooking, batteries for the flashlight, candles, matches, jugs of water since there was no plumbing. But first, coffee. Elena needed coffee more than she needed food. The closest convenience store was 8 blocks away. Elena walked there through the February cold, leaving Sophia in their cell with strict instructions not to leave the second floor, not to go near the flooded courtyard, not to open the door for anyone. The store was warm and bright and normal in a way that made Elena's chest ache. She bought a large coffee black, no room for cream she couldn't afford, and stood near the register drinking it slowly, absorbing the heat and normalcy. "You're not from around here." The clerk was a young guy, maybe 25, with tattoos creeping up his neck and a name tag that said Jason. New to the neighborhood, Elena wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Which neighborhood? This area's pretty rough. Half the buildings are empty." "Harbor Road. The old monastery." Jason's eyebrows shot up. "Street Clements? That place is condemned. Has been since before I was born." "I know. I bought it anyway." "You bought?" He laughed, then saw her face and stopped. "Wait, you're serious? You're living there?" "For now." Jason shook his head slowly. "Lady, that building floods. The whole lower level goes underwater twice a day. My grandfather told me stories about it. Used to be a functioning monastery until the 62nds. Then the ocean started claiming it. Last monks who lived there had to evacuate in the middle of the night when a storm surge almost trapped them inside. Good thing I don't plan on spending time on the ground floor then. It's not safe. The structure is all I can afford." Elena's voice came out harder than she intended. "So, unless you've got better suggestions, I'd appreciate people keeping their opinions about my housing situation to themselves." Jason raised his hands in surrender. "Hey, no judgment. Just looking out for you. That building's been empty so long, people forget it's there. You need anything supplies, whatever this store's open 24 hours. After buying supplies, Elena returned to find Sophia exploring the second-floor hallway. The little girl had discovered something Elena hadn't noticed the day before: faded frescoes painted directly onto the plaster walls between the cell doors. Religious scenes, saints and angels, and biblical stories rendered in colors that had once been vibrant but were now pale ghosts of themselves. "Mama, look how pretty." Sophia traced a faded angel with one finger. "Why did they paint on the walls?" "To make the monastery beautiful, to remind the monks about their faith." Elena studied the frescoes. Whoever had painted them had been talented. Even faded and damaged, they showed skill and care. "Can we paint our room?" "Maybe." Elena smiled, despite everything. "When we have money for paint." They settled into a routine over the next week. Elena job hunted during the day while Sophia was at school, filling out applications online using library Wi-Fi, calling restaurants and bakeries with her dwindling cell phone battery. Every night, she came back to the monastery with rejection after rejection wearing away at her resolve. But they had shelter, cold, uncomfortable shelter with no running water or electricity, but 4 walls and a roof. Elena bought sleeping bags and a camping stove. She filled water jugs at the public library. They ate canned soup, heated over the camping stove, did homework by flashlight, went to bed when the sun set, because candles were expensive and batteries didn't last. Sophia never complained. She adapted with that terrible resilience, making up stories about living in a castle, about being a monk from centuries ago. Elena watched her daughter turn their disaster into a game and felt guilt that weighed more than the stone walls surrounding them. 10 days into living at the monastery, Elena met their first visitor. She was scrubbing Sophia's school clothes in a bucket of cold water. They'd found a spigot outside the building that still worked, producing a thin stream of rust-colored water when she heard footsteps approaching. Her head snapped up, body tensing with the automatic fear of someone who'd been homeless and vulnerable. A woman stood at the edge of their dead-end street, maybe 60 years old, wearing a winter coat and carrying what looked like a casserole dish. "Hello?" The woman's voice carried clearly in the quiet morning. "I'm looking for whoever's living in the old monastery." Elena stood slowly, positioning herself between the stranger and the door where Sophia was inside. "That's me. I'm Margaret Foster. I live 3 blocks over, on Preston Street." The woman approached carefully, as though afraid of startling Elena. "I heard someone had moved into Street Clements. Wanted to see if you needed anything." "We're fine." Automatic response. Automatic lie. Margaret looked at the wet clothes hanging over the iron railing, the water jugs stacked by the door, the general situation that screamed not fine. "I brought ziti. Made too much last night. Thought maybe you could use it." The smell of the food made Elena's stomach clench with hunger. They'd been eating canned soup and peanut butter sandwiches for days. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Margaret held out the dish. "It's still warm. Got a way to heat it up?" "Camping stove." "Good enough." Margaret pressed the casserole into Elena's hands. "Listen, I don't know your story, and I'm not asking. But this neighborhood takes care of its own. You need anything, and I mean anything. I'm at 327 Preston Street, the house with the blue door." After Margaret left, Elena stood holding the casserole dish, feeling tears prick her eyes. Kindness, when you expected cruelty or indifference, had a way of breaking through defenses you'd built to survive. She and Sophia ate the ziti that night, savoring every bite of real, homemade food. Sophia asked if Mrs. Foster might come back, if maybe they could be friends. Elena didn't have the heart to explain that charity, however well-meaning, wasn't the same as friendship. But 2 days later, Margaret returned with more food and an offer. "I run a breakfast program at St. Mary's Church on Preston. We serve hot meals 4 mornings a week. You and your daughter should come." "We're not." Elena started to refuse on principle, pride making her want to say they didn't need charity. "You're not what? Hungry?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Everyone's hungry for something. Ours is just food. Come Thursday morning, 7 a.m. Tell them Margaret sent you." Elena went. She and Sophia ate scrambled eggs and toast and fruit in a church basement with a dozen other people who were struggling in various ways. The food was good, hot, plentiful. More importantly, no one asked questions or made them feel like burdens. They just ate, and it was enough. The monastery revealed itself slowly, like someone sharing secrets they'd kept for decades. Elena explored it whenever Sophia was at school, moving cautiously through spaces that had been sealed and silent for longer than Elena had been alive. The 3rd floor was mostly intact, though the roof leaked in several places. She found what must have been the abbot's quarters, a larger cell with a fireplace that might still work if she could find a way to clean the chimney. She found a library where shelves still lined the walls, though the books were long gone. She found a kitchen with a massive stone oven built into the wall, cold and dusty but structurally sound. And everywhere, she found evidence of the monks who'd lived here, faded frescoes depicting saints, Latin inscriptions carved into stone doorframes, a chapel on the 3rd floor with an altar still intact, though the religious artifacts had been removed. But it was the 2nd week, during a particularly low tide, that Elena decided to explore the flooded lower level. She waited until the water had receded. As far as it would go, she'd been tracking the tidal patterns, learning when the courtyard was merely damp versus completely submerged. Armed with her flashlight and wearing boots she'd found at a thrift store, she descended the stone stairs into the ground floor. The smell hit her first: ocean brine, decay, mildew. The stone floor was slick with algae and mud. Water dripped from the ceiling, creating a constant percussion that echoed off the walls. This level was essentially abandoned to the sea, claimed by nature when humans gave up. But the structure was still sound. Elena ran her hands over the stone walls, feeling their solidity, the arched ceilings, the craftsmanship that had built something meant to last centuries. Yes, it flooded, but the building itself wasn't collapsing. It was just adapting to a new reality. She explored methodically, mapping out the ground floor in her mind. The cells here were smaller than the ones above, with lower ceilings. Storage rooms, maybe, or spaces for lay workers rather than monks. Most were empty, except for debris. Then she found a door she'd missed before, tucked into an alcove in the northwest corner. Heavy wood, bound with iron, with a lock that had rusted into permanence. Elena almost walked past it. Clearly no one had opened this door in decades, and she had no key even if the lock still worked. But something made her stop, some instinct she couldn't name. The door was different from the others, heavier, more deliberately secured, like it was protecting something rather than just closing off a room. She examined the lock more closely. Completely rusted, the mechanism probably fused solid, but the door itself had a handle, an iron ring set into the wood. On impulse, Elena grabbed the ring and pulled. Nothing happened. She pulled harder, bracing her feet against the slippery stone. Still nothing. Then she remembered something from her grandfather, a man she'd never met, but whose stories Rosa had told. Benito had been a carpenter before he'd tried real estate investment. He'd understood how old buildings worked. Sometimes locks rust shut, but hinges are what really hold a door, Rosa had said once. You want to open something old? Don't fight the lock. Go for the hinges. Elena examined the door's edge. Sure enough, 3 massive iron hinges, thick as her thumb. Rusted, yes, but visible. Accessible. She found a rock in the courtyard and used it to hammer at the pins, trying to drive them up and out. The first pin wouldn't budge. The second moved slightly, a fraction of an inch. The third, on her 5th blow, suddenly shot upward with a screech of metal that made her jump. 20 minutes later, sweating despite the cold, Elena had driven out all 3 pins. The door was no longer held by hinges, just by the rusted lock. She wedged the rock into the gap she'd created and pried. The door groaned, shifted, and suddenly swung inward, pulling free of the lock's frozen grip. Elena aimed her flashlight through the opening and froze. This wasn't a storage cell or monk's quarters. This was a stairwell, carved directly into the stone, descending deeper than should have been possible. The stairs spiraled down in a tight curve, disappearing into darkness her flashlight couldn't penetrate. The monastery had a sub-level, something below even the flooded ground floor, hidden behind a door no one had opened in decades. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to close the door, walk away, forget this existed. Nothing good lived in spaces like this, in hidden places below the waterline. But Rosa's voice echoed in her memory. Your grandfather thought there was something valuable in that monastery, something the monks had protected. He never found it before the city condemned the place, but he always believed it was there. Elena looked at the descending stairs, then back toward where Sophia waited upstairs, safe and warm in their 2nd-floor cell. Not today, she decided. Not alone, not unprepared, not without backup. But soon. Because if there was something valuable down there, something worth protecting behind a reinforced door and hidden stairs, then maybe, just maybe, their gamble on this condemned monastery wasn't as hopeless as everyone believed. The door stayed closed for 3 more days while Elena planned. She needed better flashlights, batteries, rope, maybe in case the stairs were damaged. She needed someone to know where she was going in case something happened. But more than anything, she needed to choose the right time, low tide, when the water had receded as far as possible. On the 3rd night, lying on her sleeping bag with Sophia snoring softly beside her, Elena made a decision. Tomorrow, during the lowest tide of the month, she would descend those stairs. She would see what the monks had hidden. She would discover what her grandfather had died believing was there. And maybe, if God or fate or whatever force governed desperate women and condemned monasteries was feeling generous, she would find something that could change their lives. The water that now rose toward her knees felt different than ocean water, colder, somehow, more aggressive, like it had been waiting for someone to open that hidden door, and now it was rushing in to reclaim what had been kept from it. Elena pulled harder on the iron ring in the floor. Her muscles screamed. Her hands slipped on the cold metal. But slowly, with a grinding sound of stone on stone, the section of floor began to lift. It wasn't solid stone like she'd thought. It was a hatch, perfectly fitted to look like part of the floor, with the iron ring as the only indication it could be moved. As it lifted, water began pouring through the gap, not up from below, but down, draining into some cavity beneath. "Mama, what is that?" Sophia's voice was small, terrified. "I don't know, baby." Elena got the hatch fully open and aimed her flashlight down. The beam revealed another staircase, this one descending into what looked like a cistern or holding tank, currently being drained by the water rushing through the opened hatch. This was it, the monastery's deepest secret, hidden below the sublevel, protected by multiple layers of concealment and misdirection. Elena could see something at the bottom of the cistern, shapes that didn't belong to natural cave formation or simple water storage. But the water rising around them was now at her thighs, and climbing faster. They didn't have time to explore. They barely had time to survive. "We're going down," Elena said, making the decision with the desperate clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. "The water's draining that way. If we can get to the bottom before it fills up again, maybe there's another way out." "Mama, I'm scared." "I know. Me too." Elena picked up Sophia, settling the little girl on her hip. "But we're brave, remember? We're explorers. And explorers don't give up." She descended into the darkness, water rushing past them, carrying them down toward whatever the monks had hidden so thoroughly that it had stayed secret for over 50 years. Toward the answer to why a condemned monastery had been worth saving, toward everything that would change their lives forever. The stairs descended 20 feet before opening into a chamber that stole Elena's breath. Her flashlight beam swept across a space that shouldn't exist, a vaulted room carved directly from bedrock, maybe 30 feet in diameter, with a curved ceiling supported by stone ribs that met at a central keystone. The architecture was older than the monastery above, medieval or earlier, built with the kind of precision that suggested this chamber had been here long before the 1847 structure. The water that had been rising above now drained through channels carved into the floor, disappearing into darkness at the chamber's edges. Elena set Sophia down carefully, her feet finding purchase on stone that was damp but solid. The little girl clung to her leg, shaking with cold and fear. "Where are we, Mama?" "I don't know." Elena's voice echoed strangely in the enclosed space. "But I think the monks built the monastery on top of something that was already here." The flashlight beam found the chamber's walls, and Elena's breath caught. Every surface was covered in carvings, not simple decoration, but intricate relief work depicting scenes she recognized from her Catholic childhood. The Stations of the Cross, saints performing miracles, angels and demons in eternal battle. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each figure rendered with detail that seemed impossible to achieve in solid stone. But it was the center of the chamber that made her hands shake. A stone platform rose from the floor, circular, maybe 10 feet across. And on that platform, arranged with obvious reverence and care, sat objects that gleamed in her flashlight beam, with colors that had no business existing in an abandoned space beneath a flooded monastery. Elena approached slowly, Sophia's hand gripped tightly in hers. The objects resolved as they got closer, becoming distinct shapes rather than just glimmers of light. A chalice, maybe 8 inches tall, made of gold so pure it seemed to glow. The cup was encrusted with stones, rubies, or garnets. Elena couldn't tell, arranged in patterns that looked like flames climbing toward the rim. The craftsmanship was beyond anything she'd seen outside museum exhibits. Beside it, a reliquary, a small, ornate box, maybe 12 inches long, made of silver and gold with panels of what looked like ivory or bone, carved with scenes from scripture. The box's corners were reinforced with metalwork that showed age but no decay, as if whoever had created it had understood how to make things that would last forever. A crucifix, 2 feet tall, carved from what looked like a single piece of dark wood, ebony maybe, with a figure of Christ rendered in such detail that Elena could see individual ribs, the texture of hair, the expression of suffering and transcendence on the carved face. The cross itself was bound with bands of gold at the joints, and where the nails would have gone through Christ's hands and feet, large gemstones had been set, catching her flashlight and throwing colored light across the chamber walls. Books, 6 of them, bound in leather so old it was nearly black, resting on a stone shelf carved into the wall. Even from several feet away, Elena could see the illuminated pages through gaps in the binding's gold leaf that still gleamed. Illustrations painted in colors that medieval artisans had achieved through methods modern chemists couldn't quite replicate. And everywhere, smaller objects, candlesticks made of precious metals, small statues of saints carved from materials. Elena couldn't identify jade, perhaps, or alabaster, or something even rarer. Boxes containing she didn't know what, each one decorated with such care that they were artworks in themselves. The collection filled the platform with calculated precision, each piece positioned as though its location mattered deeply. This wasn't random storage, this was curation. This was preservation done with the understanding that these objects were priceless, sacred, worth protecting at any cost. "Mama, is that treasure?" Sophia whispered the question, like she was afraid to speak too loudly in this space. "I think so, baby." Elena's voice came out rough. "I think this is what Grandpa Benito was looking for, what the monks were protecting." Her mind spun through possibilities, trying to understand what she was seeing. These weren't just valuable objects. These were relics, religious artifacts from centuries past, hidden beneath a monastery that had been built specifically to protect them. The Nazis, she thought suddenly. During World War II, religious communities all over Europe had hidden their treasures from Nazi looting. Some of those treasures had never been recovered. Was this a collection that had been smuggled to America, hidden in a place so obscure that even after the war ended, even after the danger passed, the location had been lost? Or was it older than that? The chamber itself looked medieval. Had this been a hiding place for centuries, protecting sacred objects through wars and reformations and political upheavals that made possessing such things dangerous? Elena moved closer to the platform, her flashlight beam playing across each object. Up close, the craftsmanship was even more extraordinary. The chalice alone was probably worth what? Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? She had no idea how to value such things, but the weight of gold and the size of the stones suggested enormous worth, even before considering historical significance. The reliquary caught her attention. Its silver surface was engraved with Latin text, so small, Elena had to squint to make it out. Sanctus Clemens, she read aloud. Saint Clement. Like the monastery? Sophia's voice was stronger now. Curiosity overcoming fear. Exactly like the monastery. Elena's pulse quickened. Saint Clement. The monastery above was called Street Clements. This reliquary, this entire collection, was connected to the building's namesake, Saint. She noticed something else then, a leather-bound book, separate from the others, lying flat on the stone platform beside the chalice. Unlike the medieval manuscripts, this looked more recent, maybe from the 19th century. Elena opened it carefully, half expecting the pages to crumble, but the leather and paper had been preserved by the constant cool temperature and low humidity of the sealed chamber. The first page bore a title written in careful English script, Inventory and Providence of the Sacred Collection of Street Clements Monastery, Providence, Rhode Island. Compiled by Brother Thomas Aquinas Morrison, June 15th, 1847. 1847. The same year the monastery above had been built. This book had been written when the structure was new, when monks first occupied the building and brought with them whatever treasures they'd been protecting. Elena turned pages carefully, reading by flashlight. Brother Thomas's handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its uniformity, each entry documenting an object with obsessive detail. Item the first, Chalice of Saint Clement, crafted in Rome, circa 1095 AD, gold weight 14.3 troy pounds, adorned with 47 garnets from Ceylon, used by 3 popes for celebration of Mass, brought to America 1846 for preservation during European political unrest. Estimated value, beyond calculation, as this cup has touched the lips of saints and pontiffs across 8 centuries. 8 centuries. This chalice was nearly 1,000 years old. Elena kept reading, her hands beginning to shake as the scope of what she'd found became clear. Item the second, Reliquary of Saint Clement, commissioned 1189 AD by Pope Clement III, to house fingerbone of the saint for whom he was named, crafted by master goldsmith Pietro di Venezia. Silver and gold, with ivory panels depicting the saint's martyrdom. Gemstone inlay, includes 23 sapphires and 8 emeralds. Brought to America 1846. Value, incalculable due to religious significance and papal connection. Item the third, Crucifix of St. Francis, carved 1226 AD, from wood of olive tree in Assisi, handled by St. Francis himself in final days before his death. Gold reinforcement added 1,340 by order of Pope Clement VI. Rubies at nail points added 1,502. Brought to America 1,846 for protection during Italian wars of unification. Value cannot be measured in earthly currency, as this cross was touched by hands that bore the stigmata. The entries continued, page after page, each object documented with providence that traced back centuries. Each one brought to America in 1846 by a group of monks fleeing European political turmoil, seeking a place remote enough and obscure enough to keep these treasures safe from theft or destruction. They'd chosen Providence, Rhode Island. They'd built St. Clement's Monastery on top of an existing medieval chamber, possibly a smuggler's cave or merchant's vault from colonial days, and they'd hidden their collection in the deepest, most secure location possible. And they'd kept it secret. Even when the monastery was condemned in 1967, even when the last monks evacuated, the location of the chamber had remained hidden. The knowledge had died with the final inhabitants, leaving the collection sealed and forgotten beneath a flooded building no one wanted. Until Elena, desperate and homeless with nowhere else to go, had bought it for $1. The inventory book contained more than just descriptions. Brother Thomas had included valuations, though he repeatedly noted that many items were beyond earthly worth, due to religious significance. But for the objects where monetary value could be estimated, he'd provided figures in $1847. Elena did rough math in her head, trying to convert 19th century valuations to modern worth. Gold alone had increased by a factor of 100? More? The chalice's 14 pounds of gold would be worth over $300,000 just as raw metal, never mind the historical significance or craftsmanship. And there were dozens of objects, dozens of priceless artifacts, each one worth a fortune individually, collectively representing a treasure that shouldn't exist outside the Vatican's vaults. "Mama, I'm cold." Sophia's voice pulled Elena back to immediate reality. They were standing in a stone chamber beneath a flooded monastery, soaking wet. The temperature, probably in the low 40s. Her daughter was shivering so hard, her teeth chattered. Elena's mind snapped back into focus. The treasure was real. The collection existed. But right now, Sophia needed warmth and safety more than Elena needed to catalog priceless relics. "Okay, baby, let's go back up." Elena closed the inventory book carefully and set it back on the platform. She took one last sweep with her flashlight, memorizing the layout, the objects, the reality of what existed down here. Then she noticed something she'd missed before another opening in the chamber wall, partially hidden behind the stone platform. A tunnel, maybe 3 feet wide, sloping upward into darkness. An escape route? Or just another mystery in a building that seemed built entirely from secrets? "Come on." Elena picked up Sophia, feeling how cold the little girl's body was, how much she was shaking. They'd been down here maybe 20 minutes, but that was 20 minutes too long in wet clothes in near-freezing temperatures. The water that had drained through the floor channels was gone now, suggesting the tide had turned and was flowing back out. That meant they had a window to get back to the upper levels before the next surge. Elena climbed the cistern stairs quickly, Sophia clinging to her neck. The sublevel they'd originally entered was still damp, but no longer flooding. Elena navigated back to the main stairwell, up to the ground floor, then the second floor, where their cell waited with sleeping bags and dry clothes. She stripped Sophia down and wrapped her in every dry piece of clothing they owned, rubbing warmth back into the little girl's limbs. Then she changed her own soaking clothes, hands shaking from cold and delayed shock. They'd found it. The thing Benito had believed was there. The treasure the monks had protected so carefully that knowledge of its existence had died with them. A collection of sacred relics worth what? Millions? Tens of millions? Elena pulled out her phone, battery at 23%, and tried to think clearly through the adrenaline and exhaustion. She needed help, expert help, someone who could tell her what she'd actually found, what it was worth, whether claiming it was even legal. But who? Who could she trust with this? Who wouldn't immediately try to take it away from her, claim it belonged to the church or the government or some institution with better lawyers than a homeless single mother could ever afford? Rosa. She should start with Rosa. Her aunt had been the one to tell her about the monastery in the first place. Rosa had known Benito, had heard his stories about something valuable hidden in the building. Rosa would believe her. Elena waited until Sophia fell asleep, exhausted from fear and cold, before she called. The phone rang 4 times before Rosa's voice answered, scratchy and annoyed. "Do you know what time it is?" Elena checked her phone. 11:47 p.m. "Rosa, I found it. I found what Grandpa was looking for." A long pause. Then Rosa's voice came back, sharp, awake. "What exactly did you find?" "Religious artifacts. Relics. Hidden in a chamber beneath the monastery. Gold. Gemstones. Objects that are centuries old. There's an inventory book. The monks documented everything before they hid it. Rosa, I think this collection is worth millions." Another pause. Longer this time. "Elena, are you sure? Not just some old church decorations?" "I'm sure. There's a chalice from 1095 AD, a reliquary that belonged to a pope, a crucifix that St. Francis of Assisi actually touched. It's real, Rosa. All of it." She heard Rosa's sharp intake of breath. "Madre de Dio, your grandfather was right. He always said there was something valuable, something the monks wouldn't have abandoned unless they had no choice." "What do I do?" Elena's voice cracked. "I don't know how to handle this. Who to call? How to even begin?" "First, you tell no one else. No one, Elena. Not a friend, not a priest. Nobody. Word gets out about treasure in an abandoned monastery. You'll have looters and thieves swarming the place before you can blink. I have to tell someone eventually. I need experts to evaluate it, authenticate it. Eventually, yes, but carefully, very carefully." Rosa's voice took on the sharp edge of someone who'd survived by being careful. "Tomorrow, you secure that chamber. Figure out how to lock it up properly. Then you document everything, photographs, measurements, whatever you can do safely. After that, we find a lawyer. A good one. Someone who can help you navigate the legal side of found treasure and religious artifacts." "I don't have money for lawyers, Rosa." "You will once this is resolved. Any lawyer with sense will work on contingency for a case like this. But Elena, listen to me very carefully. This isn't just about money. These are sacred objects. The Catholic Church is going to have opinions about who they belong to. The Italian government might claim some of them came from their country illegally. You're going to need serious legal protection." Elena felt the weight of what she'd found settling onto her shoulders like a physical burden. "I just wanted a place to live. I just needed shelter for Sophia. I know, mija. But God or fate, or whatever you believe in, just handed you something much bigger than shelter. The question is, what you do with it." After hanging up, Elena lay awake for hours, listening to the monastery breathe around her. The building that had seemed like a desperate last resort now felt different. Sacred, maybe. Or at least significant in ways she was just beginning to understand. Somewhere below her, protected by stone and water and centuries of careful secrecy, sat a collection worth more than Elena would make in 100 lifetimes as a pastry chef. Objects that had survived wars and upheavals and the collapse of empires. And now they belonged to her. Legally, probably, she'd bought the property and everything on it. But morally, that was more complicated. These weren't just valuable objects. They were sacred relics. They belonged in a church or a museum, or somewhere people could appreciate their spiritual and historical significance. They didn't belong hidden beneath a condemned monastery, claimed by a homeless woman who'd bought the building for $1 out of desperation. But they were hers, at least for now, at least until lawyers and the church and whoever else had claims could sort out ownership. Elena thought about Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her sleeping bag. Thought about the months of struggle, the fear, the nights in the car wondering if they'd survive the cold. Thought about what a collection worth millions could mean: real shelter, security, education for Sophia, a life without the constant terror of losing everything again. Maybe she wasn't the right person to have found this treasure. Maybe someone more educated, more religious, more worthy should have been the one to discover the chamber. But Elena had been the one desperate enough to buy a condemned monastery. She'd been the one brave or foolish enough to explore its flooded depths. She'd been the one who'd opened doors that had stayed sealed for decades. And maybe, just maybe, that meant she was exactly the right person after all. Morning came with weak February sunlight and a determination Elena hadn't felt since losing her job at Bellissimo. She had a plan now. Not a perfect plan, not even a complete plan, but something more than just surviving day to day. First, document everything. Rosa was right. She needed photographs, measurements, detailed records of what existed in that chamber. If this went to court, if the church tried to claim the collection, if the government got involved, Elena needed proof of exactly what she'd found and when. She left Sophia with Margaret Foster. The older woman had offered to watch her after school, had become an unexpected ally in their struggle to survive, and returned to the monastery with her phone fully charged and a notebook from the dollar store. The tide was out, giving her access to the sublevel. Elena descended carefully, mapped her route, timed how long she had before water would return. The chamber beneath was dry when she climbed down through the cistern hatch, exactly as she'd left it. She spent 2 hours photographing everything from multiple angles: the chalice, front and back, and from above, the reliquary with close-ups of its carved panels. Each book, each candlestick, each small statue, the stone platform, the carved walls, the chamber's architecture, the inventory book, every page photographed clearly enough that she could read Brother Thomas's careful script. She took measurements, sketched rough layouts, wrote descriptions of anything her phone's camera couldn't capture adequately. This was evidence. This was documentation that would prove she'd found something real and valuable, not just invented some fantasy about hidden treasure. When she'd photographed everything she could safely reach without actually handling the artifacts, she was terrified of dropping something, of damaging objects that had survived centuries. Elena sat on the stone floor and reviewed the images on her phone. They were real. The photographs proved it. Gold gleaming in her camera flash, gemstones catching light, craftsmanship that couldn't be faked or mistaken for anything cheap or modern. Her phone buzzed. Text from Rosa. Found lawyer. Patricia Chen. Providence. Smart, aggressive, used to handling complicated estate cases. Willing to meet tomorrow. Elena typed back. Can't afford. Rosa's response came immediately. Contingency basis. I explained situation. She's interested. Seeing dollar signs probably, but she'll protect your rights. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Her office. Don't be late. The law offices of Chen and Associates occupied the second floor of a building in downtown Providence that looked like it had been converted from something industrial. High ceilings, exposed brick, windows that let in floods of natural light. Elena arrived 15 minutes early. Sophia beside her because she had no one to leave her with. Both of them dressed in the best clothes they owned, which wasn't saying much. The receptionist looked at them with barely concealed judgment, taking in Elena's worn coat and Sophia's outgrown shoes, but she buzzed them through anyway. Miss Chen will see you now. Patricia Chen was in her mid-50s, Elena guessed, with steel grey hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that made her look like she could see through bullshit from across a room. Her office was organized, chaos files stacked on every surface. A whiteboard covered in case notes, bookshelves sagging under the weight of legal volumes. Miss Corvetti. Patricia stood and offered her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Rosa Santos speaks very highly of you. Please, sit. Elena sat in one of the chairs facing Patricia's desk, pulling Sophia into her lap because the little girl looked terrified by the formal setting. Rosa says you found something interesting in that monastery you bought. Patricia sat back in her chair, fingers steepled, eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. Why don't you tell me about it? Elena took a breath and began. She explained the auction, buying the building for $1, exploring the flooded levels, finding the hidden door and descending stairs. The chamber beneath, carved from bedrock, filled with religious artifacts. The inventory book, documenting each object's history and value. She pulled out her phone and showed Patricia the photographs. The lawyer's expression remained neutral through the first few images, then shifted subtly as she began to understand what she was seeing. May I? Patricia reached for the phone. Elena handed it over and watched the lawyer scroll through hundreds of photographs, her face growing more intent with each image. Finally, Patricia set down the phone and looked at Elena with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and calculation. Miss Corvetti, do you understand what you found? Religious artifacts worth a lot of money? That's underselling it considerably. Patricia pulled up a search on her computer, typed quickly, pulled up auction results for religious antiquities. A medieval chalice sold at Sotheby's last year for $800,000. It was 14th century, modest craftsmanship. What you have, a chalice from 1095, used by popes, with documented provenance that's worth easily 2 to 3 million. Conservatively. Elena's vision swam. 2 to 3 million? For one cup? For one cup with that history, yes. Patricia scrolled through more photographs. This reliquary, if it's authentic, and your inventory book suggests it is, could be worth another 2 million. The crucifix touched by St. Francis? Another million, maybe 2. And you say there are dozens of objects. At least 40 or 50 pieces that look valuable. More if you count the smaller items. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Running calculations Elena could almost see happening behind her eyes. Miss Corvetti, if everything in that chamber is authentic and properly documented, you're looking at a collection worth conservatively $70 to $80 million. Possibly much more depending on how the church values religious significance versus monetary worth. The number was so large it lost meaning. Elena couldn't process it, couldn't make it connect to reality. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's probable based on recent auction results for comparable pieces. Patricia leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about value. These are religious artifacts, probably smuggled out of Europe illegally at some point, hidden in America for nearly 200 years. Multiple parties are going to claim ownership: the Catholic Church, the Italian government, possibly the Vatican itself. If they can prove papal connection, but I bought the property legally. Everything on it is mine. That's your legal position, yes. And it's a strong one under American found treasure law. You purchased the property. You discovered previously unknown assets on that property through your own effort, and you have documentation proving all of this. But the church will argue these are sacred objects that can't legally be owned by individuals. Italy might claim they were stolen cultural heritage. The Vatican could invoke canon law. Elena felt her hope crumbling. So, I won't get to keep any of it. I didn't say that. Patricia's smile was sharp. I said, multiple parties will make claims. That doesn't mean they'll succeed. With the right legal strategy, we can establish your ownership and force any interested parties to negotiate. At minimum, you'll receive significant finder's fees, even if you don't retain full ownership. More likely, we'll reach a settlement where you sell portions of the collection to the church or museums and keep others. How much are we talking about? Realistically, if we play this right, 30 to 40 million after taxes and legal fees. Patricia watched Elena's face. That's assuming we move carefully, don't get greedy, and prioritize establishing legitimate ownership over maximizing profit. $30 to $40 million. Elena tried to imagine that amount of money, tried to picture what it would mean for her and Sophia. Security, education, a home, never worrying again about rent or food or whether they'd survive the winter. What do you need from me? First, exclusive representation, agreement. I work on contingency 30% of anything you receive. That's high, but this case is going to be complex and lengthy. I'll be fighting multiple entities with deep pockets and better lawyers than most people can afford. 30% is fine. What was 30% of 40 million? Elena couldn't even calculate it. But what remained would still be more money than she'd ever imagined having. Second, complete discretion. You tell no one about this, not friends, not other family, absolutely not the press. News of this leaks, we'll have chaos. Treasure hunters, thieves, media circus. It'll make legitimate legal proceedings nearly impossible. I understand. Third, we secure the site immediately. Professional security, proper documentation, expert authentication of the artifacts. That means money up front, which I know you don't have, but I can front the costs with the understanding we recoup from eventual settlement. Patricia pulled out a contract, several pages of legal language Elena couldn't hope to understand. Read this carefully, or have Rosa read it if you trust her judgment. If you sign, you're agreeing to my representation and my legal strategy. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Elena thought about Sophia, waiting in the outer office with the receptionist. Thought about their cell in the monastery, cold and damp, but at least shelter. Thought about months of struggle and rejection, and wondering if they'd survive. She picked up the pen. Where do I sign? The next 2 weeks moved with a speed that left Elena dizzy. Patricia worked with the efficiency of someone who'd been practicing law for 3 decades and knew exactly how to navigate complicated cases. First came the security team, 3 men Patricia hired from a company that specialized in protecting high-value assets. They installed motion sensors around the monastery, cameras covering all approaches, and a lockbox system for the chamber entrance. Elena gave them access to the sub-level, showed them the hidden chamber, watched them take their own documentation and measurements. Then came the experts. Dr. Sarah Whitmore, a professor of medieval religious art from Brown University, who descended into the chamber and emerged 3 hours later looking like she'd seen the face of God. Dr. Marcus Bellini, an Italian antiquities specialist who'd worked with the Vatican on several authentication projects. Dr. Rebecca Ostroff, a gemologist who examined the stones and declared them museum quality, possibly royal provenance. Each expert provided written opinions on authenticity, historical significance, and estimated value. Each opinion raised the collection's worth higher than Patricia's initial conservative estimates. We're looking, at minimum, 150 million, Patricia told Elena during a meeting in her 3rd week. Possibly as high as 200 million if we can establish clear provenance for every piece. Elena sat in Patricia's office, the numbers washing over her with about as much impact as hearing about distant galaxies. 200 million was too large to mean anything. It existed in some realm beyond her comprehension. What happens now? Now we file proper legal claims. I've drafted documents establishing your ownership of the property and all assets therein. We're filing with Rhode Island Probate Court to get a judgment on the collection's status. And, Patricia paused, her expression serious, we notify the Catholic Church. They have a right to know these artifacts exist, and frankly, we need their cooperation. If they fight us on ownership, this could drag out for years. Will they fight us? Honestly, I don't know. The Church has never liked private ownership of sacred relics, but they also don't have unlimited resources for legal battles. They might negotiate, especially if we offer to donate some pieces in exchange for clear title to others. Elena thought about the chalice, the reliquary, the crucifix St. Francis had touched. I don't want to fight the Church, Patricia. These are sacred objects. They should be somewhere people can appreciate them, not hidden in a chamber beneath a condemned building. That's good positioning, Patricia said, approvingly. Shows good faith. But Elena, don't give away your leverage. You found these objects. You own them legally. You're entitled to compensation for discovery, even if you ultimately donate everything to museums. The first response came not from the Church, but from the press. Someone, Patricia, suspected one of the security team, despite their NDAs, leaked information about a major religious artifact discovery at a Providence monastery. The Providence Journal ran a story on page 3. Local woman claims, discovery of medieval treasures in condemned building. The article was skeptical, using words like alleged and unverified, but it was enough. Within 48 hours, Elena's phone was ringing constantly with reporters wanting interviews. Television crews showed up at the monastery. Treasure hunters tried to sneak onto the property, setting off the new security alarms. Elena stayed hidden in their second-floor cell, refusing all interview requests, while the guards Patricia had hired turned away curiosity seekers and journalists. Sophia thought it was exciting. Mama, are we famous? But Elena felt only dread at their privacy being destroyed. The Catholic Diocese of Providence responded officially 1 week after the press coverage began. The letter arrived by courier, addressed to Patricia's office, written on official diocesan letterhead. Dear Miss Chen, the Diocese of Providence acknowledges receipt of your notice regarding artifacts allegedly discovered at the former St. Clement's Monastery. The Church has significant interest in these items, particularly if they include sacred relics with religious significance. We request immediate access for official Church authentication and documentation. Additionally, we must express our position that sacred relics, by canon law, cannot be privately owned and must remain under Church authority. We invite you and Miss Corvetti to meet with Bishop Thomas Marchand to discuss appropriate resolution of this matter. Sincerely, Monsignor James Sullivan, Chancellor, Diocese of Providence. Patricia read the letter aloud to Elena over the phone. This is actually good news. They're not threatening immediate legal action. They want to negotiate. What do? We meet with the bishop. We show good faith. We establish that you're not some treasure hunter trying to loot religious artifacts. You're a woman who made a legitimate discovery and wants to see these objects properly cared for. But we make clear you expect fair compensation. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the diocesan offices. Elena spent 3 days anxious, changing outfits a dozen times, practicing what she'd say. Patricia coached her carefully. Be respectful, but firm. Don't apologize for finding the collection. Don't offer to give everything away. Let me handle negotiations. Bishop Thomas Marchand was in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind face of someone who'd spent decades listening to confessions and offering comfort. But his eyes were sharp, assessing, and Elena recognized the look of someone who negotiated regularly with people trying to take advantage of the church. Miss Corvetti, he offered his hand. Thank you for coming, and for notifying us of this discovery. They sat in a conference room that smelled of old wood and furniture polish. The bishop sat across from them, with Monsignor Sullivan beside him, and two other people. Elena didn't recognize lawyers. Probably. I've reviewed the documentation your attorney provided, the bishop began. The photographs are extraordinary. If authentic, these artifacts represent a significant piece of church history. We're grateful they've been preserved, and we understand you've taken measures to protect them. Thank you, Your Excellency. Elena used the formal address Patricia had coached her on. However, the bishop's expression grew more serious. I must be clear about the church's position. Sacred relics, particularly those that have been consecrated, blessed, or used in liturgical celebration, cannot be privately owned under canon law. They belong to the Church Universal, held in trust for all believers. Patricia spoke before Elena could respond. Your Excellency, with respect, canon law doesn't supersede civil law in the United States. Miss Corvetti legally purchased property on which these items were discovered. Under American law, she has clear ownership. We're not disputing the legal technicalities, Miss Chen. We're discussing moral and spiritual obligations. These artifacts were entrusted to the monks of St. Clement's for safekeeping. That trust didn't end when the monastery was abandoned. The monks are all dead, Patricia pointed out. They failed to document the collection's existence or make provisions for its care. Miss Corvetti discovered it through her own efforts, at considerable risk and expense. The conversation went like that for 2 hours, polite but firm. Both sides establishing positions without quite making threats. The bishop argued for return of all artifacts to church authority. Patricia countered with Elena's legal ownership. They danced around the question neither wanted to ask directly. What would it take to settle this without years of litigation? Finally, Elena spoke. Your Excellency, can I say something? The bishop nodded. Of course. I'm Catholic. Not very good at it lately, haven't been to Mass in years, but I was raised in the church. My daughter was baptized Catholic. Elena took a breath. I don't want to fight the church. I don't want these sacred objects sitting in a chamber beneath a condemned building, where no one can see them or appreciate them. They should be in a church or a museum, somewhere that honors what they are. The bishop's expression softened slightly. But, Elena's voice strengthened, I also won't give them away for nothing. I bought that monastery because I had nowhere else to go. My daughter and I were sleeping in our car. We were homeless and desperate, and that building was all I could afford. I found this collection because I was willing to explore a flooded, dangerous space that had scared everyone else away for 50 years. She leaned forward. So yes, I understand these are sacred objects. And yes, I want them to end up in the right hands. But I also deserve compensation for finding them, protecting them, and being willing to work with the church instead of just selling everything to private collectors who don't care about religious significance. Silence settled over the conference room. Patricia shot Elena a look that was half pride, half concern. The bishop studied Elena for a long moment. What kind of compensation did you have in mind? Patricia answered before Elena could. We believe fair compensation would be $65 million. That represents roughly a third of the collection's estimated value, a significant discount from what Miss Corvetti could obtain through private sale. One of the lawyers beside the bishop made a choking sound. 65 million. The diocese doesn't have that kind of money, just sitting in accounts. We understand that, Patricia said smoothly, which is why we're proposing a structured settlement. The church takes possession of the most religiously significant pieces, the chalice, the reliquary, the crucifix. Miss Corvetti retains rights to sell the remaining artifacts through proper channels, with the understanding that she'll prioritize museums and religious institutions over private collectors. The church doesn't pay for sacred relics, Monsignor Sullivan said flatly. It's contrary to everything we stand for. Then call it a finder's fee, Patricia countered. Call it compensation for discovery and protection services. Call it whatever lets everyone sleep at night. But Miss Corvetti isn't walking away from this with nothing. The bishop raised a hand, silencing his lawyers before they could argue further. Miss Corvetti, may I ask you a question? Of course. If money wasn't a factor, if you had all the wealth you needed, what would you want to have happen to this collection? Elena didn't have to think about her answer. I'd want them somewhere people could see them. Somewhere they'd be protected and studied and appreciated. Somewhere the story of how they survived wars and upheavals for centuries could inspire people who need hope. The bishop nodded slowly. That's a worthy goal. Let me discuss this with the Diocese Finance Committee and our legal counsel. We'll need to find creative solutions, possibly involving museums willing to purchase pieces for public display, possibly involving restoration grants from Catholic organizations. But Miss Chen, I want to be clear. The church will not pay $65 million for artifacts that rightfully belong to us. Then we'll see you in court, Patricia said, not unkindly, where we'll spend the next 5 years arguing while the artifacts sit in a sealed chamber and no one benefits. Or, the bishop said, we could find a compromise that serves everyone's interests. Give me 2 weeks to consult with my advisors. We'll reconvene and see if we can find common ground. They left the meeting with nothing settled, but Elena felt oddly hopeful. The bishop had listened. He'd treated her with respect, rather than dismissing her as a treasure hunter or opportunist. He'd acknowledged, however reluctantly, that she deserved something for her discovery. That went well, Patricia said as they walked to her car. The church is going to negotiate. They don't want publicity about fighting a homeless single mother over religious artifacts she legally found. Bad optics. Do you think we'll get 65 million? Honestly, probably not. But we'll get something substantial. My guess is they'll offer 30 to 40 million, mostly by facilitating sales to Catholic museums and universities. We'll counter, they'll counter, and we'll land somewhere in the middle. 30 to 40 million dollars. Still an incomprehensible amount. Still more money than Elena had ever imagined having. What happens if they refuse to negotiate? If they sue instead? Patricia smiled grimly. Then we fight, and we'll probably win, though it'll take years and cost a fortune in legal fees. But Elena, I don't think it'll come to that. The bishop seemed reasonable. Monsignor Sullivan is the hardliner, but he's not the one making final decisions. That evening, back in their cell at the monastery, Elena tried to explain to Sophia what was happening in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Remember how we found the treasure in the secret room? The pretty gold cup. Exactly. Well, the church says that cup used to belong to them a long time ago, and they want it back. Sophia frowned. But we found it. Finders keepers. It's more complicated than that, baby. The cup is sacred. It's special for religious reasons. So, the church thinks it should be in a church where people can pray with it, not hidden away where no one can see it. Are they going to take it away from us? Maybe some of it, but they're going to give us money for finding it and protecting it. How much money? Enough that we won't have to live in this monastery anymore if we don't want to. Enough that you can go to any school you want. Enough that Mama won't have to worry about rent or food ever again. Sophia processed this, her face serious. But I like the monastery. It's like living in a castle. Elena pulled her daughter close, overwhelmed by how resilient children could be, how they could find magic in circumstances that would break adults. We can stay if you want to. We can fix it up, make it actually nice instead of just barely livable. And keep the treasure? Some of it, maybe. The pieces that aren't as special to the church. Elena thought about the smaller artifacts, the candlesticks and statues and books. Even selling a fraction of the collection would secure their future completely. That night, lying in her sleeping bag with Sophia breathing softly beside her, Elena felt something she hadn't felt since Michael's aneurysm had stolen her husband and destroyed their life. Hope. Not desperate hope, born from having no other options. Real hope. The kind that came from knowing the future might actually be better than the past. Somewhere beneath them, locked behind security systems and protected by guards, sat a collection of sacred objects that had survived centuries of upheaval. Objects that had been smuggled across an ocean, hidden by monks who understood what it meant to protect things worth more than money. Elena had found them because she'd been desperate enough to buy a condemned monastery for $1. Because she'd been brave enough to explore spaces that had scared everyone else away. Because she'd had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And now those objects might give her and Sophia everything Elena had been fighting for. Security, safety, a future without constant fear. The battle wasn't over. The church would negotiate hard. Other parties might emerge with claims. Legal proceedings could drag on for months or years. But for the first time since buying this building, Elena believed they were going to make it. The monastery had saved them after all, just not in any way she could have imagined. The phone call came at 6:47 inches the morning, 3 days after the meeting with Bishop Marchand. Elena fumbled for her phone in the dark, heart hammering with the automatic fear that early calls brought something happened to Sophia. Rosa had an emergency. The monastery was on fire. Miss Corvetti, a woman's voice, unfamiliar, professional. This is Catherine Walsh from the New York Times. I'm writing a story about the street, Clement's discovery, and I'd like to ask you some questions. Elena's blood went cold. How did you get this number? Public records. Miss Corvetti, our sources indicate the artifacts you found may be worth over $100 million. Some experts are calling it the most significant religious art discovery in American history. The public has a right to know. Elena hung up. The phone rang again immediately. She powered it off, hands shaking. This was what Patricia had warned her about. Once the story leaked beyond local coverage, once national media picked it up, everything would change. Privacy would disappear. Their quiet, legal negotiations would become public spectacle. She checked on Sophia, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that their lives were about to become infinitely more complicated, and then called Patricia from the monastery's landline. I saw the Times piece, Patricia said, before Elena could speak. It went live on their website 20 minutes ago. Front page of the arts section. What do we do? Nothing. We say nothing. You decline all interviews. You don't confirm or deny anything. Let them speculate. Let the church respond if they want. But you stay silent. Patricia, there are going to be reporters everywhere. They'll camp outside the monastery. They're probably already there. I've alerted the security team. They have instructions to turn away everyone except law enforcement with valid warrants. You and Sophia stay inside until this dies down. How long will that take? Patricia's pause told Elena everything she needed to know. Days, maybe weeks, if the story has legs. Elena, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted. After hanging up, Elena looked out their cell's narrow window. 3 news vans were already parked on the street below, satellite dishes extended. As she watched, a 4th pulled up. Reporters clustered near the monastery entrance, kept back by the security guards, but clearly not leaving any time soon. Sophia woke to find their home surrounded by strangers with cameras. "Mama, why are all those people here?" "They want to talk about the treasure we found." Elena tried to sound calm. "But we're not going to talk to them, okay? We're going to stay inside and let them get bored and leave." But they didn't leave. By noon, 7 news vans lined the street. Helicopters circled overhead, filming footage for evening broadcasts. Elena's phone powered back on so she could communicate with Patricia, and Rosa filled with messages from reporters, producers, documentary filmmakers, all wanting exclusive interviews, offering money for access to the collection. The New York Times article was detailed and surprisingly accurate. Someone, probably one of the experts Patricia had brought in, had talked extensively about the collection's scope and value. The piece included Elena's story: homeless single mother, bought condemned monastery for $1, discovered priceless artifacts in hidden chamber. It was the kind of story media loved: underdog triumph, hidden treasure, religious mystery. By evening, the story had been picked up by CNN, NBC, the BBC. Elena's phone rang constantly until she powered it off again. Margaret Foster appeared at the monastery door around dinner time, having somehow talked her way past the security guards. She carried a container of still warm lasagna and a look of maternal concern. "Saw the news. Figured you could use a friendly face and a hot meal." Elena almost cried from the simple kindness. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything to anyone except your lawyer." Margaret set the lasagna on the makeshift table Elena had constructed from milk crates and plywood. "The whole neighborhood's talking. Most folks are happy for you, Lord knows you deserve a break. But there's others saying things, questioning whether you really own what you found, speculating about your past." "What kind of things?" Margaret hesitated. "Doesn't matter. People talk. What matters is you've got something valuable, and you're protecting it properly. The church will do right by you. Bishop Marchand is a good man." That night, watching news coverage of their own story on Margaret's loaned iPad, Elena felt surreal disconnection from reality. The reporters stood outside the monastery, describing it as mysterious, Gothic, the site of one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the decade. One segment interviewed Dr. Whitmore from Brown, who described the collection in reverent terms. "If these artifacts are authentic, and initial examination suggests they are, we're looking at religious objects that haven't been seen by scholars in over a century. The historical value is incalculable." Another segment featured an art appraiser estimating the collection at anywhere from $150 to $250 million, depending on provenance and condition. Sophia watched wide-eyed. "Mama, that man just said we're rich." "We're not rich yet, baby. And we might never be, depending on how things get settled. But we're going to be okay. That's what matters." The calls from Patricia became more frequent as offers started pouring in. Museums wanted to negotiate for specific pieces. Private collectors were bidding against each other. A billionaire in Texas offered $30 million for the chalice alone. No questions asked. "We're not selling to private collectors," Elena told Patricia firmly. "I meant what I said to the bishop. These belong somewhere people can see them, even if it means less money." Even then, Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll prioritize museum and institutional buyers. But Elena, you need to understand taking the moral high ground is going to cost you tens of millions of dollars. I can live with that." The bishop called 5 days after the Times article appeared. Not through lawyers or intermediaries, but directly to the monastery's landline, his voice warm but weary. "Miss Corvetti, I imagine you've had a difficult week. That's one way to put it, Your Excellency. I want you to know, the diocese had nothing to do with the media coverage. We've been fielding calls from reporters constantly, but we've maintained that this is a private legal matter being negotiated in good faith. I appreciate that. I'm calling because I've spoken with Cardinal Martinez at the Vatican. He's expressed significant interest in the collection, particularly the items with papal providence. The Vatican is prepared to make a formal offer." Elena's heart rate picked up. "What kind of offer?" "They'd like to discuss it in person. Cardinal Martinez is willing to fly to Providence next week to meet with you and your attorney. He wants to see the collection firsthand, verify its authenticity, and negotiate terms that honor both your rights as discoverer and the Church's spiritual interest in these sacred objects. The Vatican wants to negotiate with me." Elena couldn't quite process it. She was a pastry chef who'd been homeless 3 months ago. The idea of sitting across a table from a Vatican cardinal discussing millions of dollars felt like something from a fever dream. "You've become quite famous, Miss Corvetti. The story of your discovery has resonated with people around the world. You're not just some treasure hunter, you're a mother who found hope in the darkest circumstances. The Church recognizes that narrative has power, and frankly, we don't want to be seen as bullying someone the public sympathizes with. So, this is about public relations? Partially, but it's also about doing what's right. These artifacts deserve to be properly cared for, studied, and displayed. You deserve to be compensated for finding them. We believe we can reach an agreement that serves both interests." After the call, Elena sat in their cell staring at nothing, trying to absorb what was happening. The Vatican. A cardinal was flying to Providence to meet with her, to negotiate over objects she'd found by accident while looking for shelter. Rosa called that evening, her voice tight with emotion. "I just got off the phone with a reporter from People magazine. They want to do a feature story, From Homeless to Hope, the woman who found sacred treasure. They're offering $20,000 for an exclusive interview." Patricia says no interviews. "I know, I told them no. But Elena, $20,000, that's real money. It's nothing compared to what we stand to make from the collection. And doing interviews now could jeopardize negotiations with the Church. You've gotten smart about this." Rosa's voice carried pride and something else, maybe concern. "Just be careful. Money changes people. Don't let it change you. I'm still the same person who bought a condemned monastery for $1. For now. But when you're sitting on millions, when everyone wants something from you, it's going to be different. Mija, just remember who you are." Cardinal Luis Martinez arrived in Providence on a Tuesday morning, traveling with an entourage that included 2 priests, a Vatican art historian, and enough security to make Elena wonder if they were expecting an ambush. The meeting took place not at the monastery. The cardinal had politely declined to visit a condemned building, but at the Providence Cathedral, in a conference room that smelled of incense and old wood and centuries of Catholic tradition. Elena dressed carefully in her best clothes, which still weren't appropriate for meeting Vatican officials, but they'd have to do. Sophia stayed with Margaret. This wasn't a conversation for 7-year-olds to hear. Cardinal Martinez was younger than Elena expected, maybe late 50s, with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that suggested he was used to commanding attention without raising his voice. He greeted her with warmth that seemed genuine. "Miss Corvetti, your discovery has caused quite a stir in Rome. The Holy Father himself has asked to be kept informed of our discussions." The Pope knew about her. Elena tried to process that and failed completely. They sat around a long table, Elena and Patricia on one side, the cardinal and his advisors on the other. Bishop Marchand sat at the head, playing mediator. "I've reviewed all the documentation your attorney provided," the cardinal began. "The inventory book, the expert authentication reports, the photographs. If everything is as represented, this is an extraordinary collection. Some of these pieces haven't been seen by church officials in over 170 years. They're exactly as represented," Patricia said. "We'd like to verify that ourselves, of course. Our art historian, Dr. Lombardi, would need several days to properly examine and document everything." "That can be arranged," Patricia agreed, "under supervised conditions, with our own experts present." "Of course." The cardinal folded his hands on the table. "Let's discuss what the Vatican is prepared to offer. We believe the most important pieces, the chalice, the reliquary, the crucifix, and perhaps a dozen other items with clear papal or saintly connection, should return to church custody. These are sacred objects that belong in service to the faithful, not in private hands." "Miss Corvetti agrees," Patricia said, before Elena could speak. "She's been clear from the beginning that she wants these artifacts properly cared for, but she also expects fair compensation." "The Vatican doesn't purchase sacred relics," one of the priests said stiffly. "It's contrary to canon law and basic decency. These objects are priceless in spiritual terms." "Then think of it as a finder's fee," Patricia countered, "or compensation for protection and preservation services. But make no mistake, Miss Corvetti is not donating a collection worth hundreds of millions of dollars out of the goodness of her heart." The cardinal raised a hand, silencing his advisor. "Miss Chen, let's not pretend this is simply about legal rights or finder's fees. This is about money. You want to know what the Vatican is willing to pay to secure custody of these artifacts. So, let me be direct. We're prepared to offer $40 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stopped breathing. Patricia's poker face held, but her fingers tightened on her pen. $40 million, Patricia repeated. "For which pieces?" "The chalice, reliquary, crucifix, and the 12 illuminated manuscripts. Additionally, we'd facilitate sales of the remaining artifacts to Catholic museums and universities, with the understanding that those institutions will pay fair market value. Our estimate is that could generate another 30 to 40 million. Elena did the math quickly. $70 to $80 million total. After Patricia's 30% and taxes, she'd clear maybe 35 to 40 million. $35 million for finding objects in a building she'd bought for $1. That's a generous opening offer, Patricia said carefully, but it undervalues several key pieces. The crucifix alone, given its connection to St. Francis, could bring 8 to 10 million at auction. You're offering to take it as part of a package deal for 40 million total. We're offering 40 million for objects that rightfully belong to the church, the priest said sharply. Objects that were stolen from Italy, smuggled to America, and hidden illegally. We could simply file suit and claim the entire collection. You could try, Patricia said coolly, and spend the next decade in court while the story of the Vatican bullying a homeless single mother plays out in global media. How do you think that ends for church public relations? The cardinal smiled slightly, as though appreciating Patricia's directness. Let's not make threats. We're all here in good faith. Miss Corvetti, you've been quiet. What do you think is fair? Elena looked at the cardinal, at Bishop Marchand, at the advisors who were clearly expecting her to be dazzled by their $40 million offer. She thought about Sophia, about the months in the car, about standing in freezing water, believing they might die in a flooded monastery. I think these objects deserve to be somewhere people can experience them, she said slowly. Not locked in a Vatican vault where scholars need special permission just to look at them. I want them in museums, in churches where regular people can see them. I want their story told, how they survived centuries of upheaval, how monks protected them, how they ended up hidden beneath a condemned building in Providence. The cardinal studied her. That's admirable. But it doesn't answer my question. What do you think is fair compensation? 65 million for the pieces you want, plus guaranteed public display of at least half the collection, rotated between institutions so maximum people can see them. And the full story told, including how I found them, where they've been, why they were hidden. No secrets, no sweeping this under the rug. The priest looked outraged. 65 million is outrageous. It's less than market value. Patricia interrupted. A private collector offered 30 million for the chalice alone yesterday. Miss Corvetti is giving you a substantial discount in exchange for guarantees about public access. The cardinal was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're a very unusual woman, Miss Corvetti. Most people in your position would take the money and run. You're negotiating for public benefit as much as personal compensation. I used to be homeless. I know what it's like to have nothing. These artifacts gave me hope when I needed it most. The idea that beautiful, sacred things could survive when everything seemed hopeless. I want other people to have that same hope. And the 65 million? Means my daughter never has to sleep in a car. Means I can help other families who are struggling. Means I can restore this monastery into something beautiful again. Elena leaned forward. Your Excellency, I'm not trying to get rich off the church. I'm trying to secure a future for my child and honor the monks who protected these objects for so long. 65 million is fair for what you're getting. The cardinal exchanged looks with Bishop Marchand, then nodded slowly. I need to consult with Rome. But Miss Corvetti, I believe we can reach an agreement. Not 40 million, not 65, but somewhere that honors both your discovery and the church's spiritual interest in these sacred objects. They settled on $55 million. The agreement took 6 weeks to negotiate in final form, with lawyers on both sides arguing over every detail. The Vatican would pay 55 million for the chalice, reliquary, crucifix, the illuminated manuscripts, and 16 other pieces, deemed most significant for religious reasons. Elena would retain rights to sell the remaining artifacts, with the understanding that Catholic institutions would get first right of refusal. Additionally, and this was the part Elena cared about most, the Vatican agreed to public display requirements. The chalice would be exhibited at major museums on a rotating basis. The reliquary would be featured in a traveling exhibition about medieval religious art. The crucifix would return to Assisi, to be displayed in the basilica dedicated to Saint Francis, where visitors could see the cross the saint had actually touched. And the story would be told. The Vatican commissioned a book documenting the collection's history, including Eleanor's discovery. Museums would tell visitors about the homeless woman who'd found these treasures while searching for shelter. Patricia negotiated additional terms. Eleanor would receive the 55 million in structured payments over 5 years to minimize tax burden. She'd retain rights to consult on how pieces were displayed and interpreted. She'd have final approval over any documentary or media productions about the discovery. This is an excellent deal, Patricia told Elena the day they signed the contracts. Better than I expected to get, honestly. The Vatican could have fought us for years, but they chose to negotiate fairly. You should be proud. Elena held the contract, dozens of pages of legal language that boiled down to, you found treasure, you're keeping enough to secure your future, and the objects will be cared for properly. It felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. What happens now? Now the hard work starts. We have to catalog everything you're keeping, negotiate sales with museums, Manage the media attention. You're going to be very busy for the next year or two. Patricia paused. And very wealthy. 55 million is just the Vatican payment. The remaining artifacts could bring another 30 to 40 million over time. 85 to 95 million dollars total. Even after taxes and legal fees, Elena would clear 45 to 50 million. She'd bought the monastery for $1. She was selling artifacts found inside for essentially 90 million. The numbers still didn't feel real. The ceremony transferring the artifacts to Vatican custody took place 3 months after the agreement was signed, on a bright June morning that felt like blessing after the dark winter when Elena had discovered the chamber. It was held at the Providence Cathedral, with media coverage that felt more like a coronation than a business transaction. Cardinal Martinez had flown back to personally accept the artifacts. Bishop Marchand presided. Elena stood beside them in a dress Patricia had insisted she buy the first new clothes she'd purchased in over a year, feeling like an imposter in formal Catholic pageantry. Sophia sat in the front row beside Rosa and Margaret, watching with wide eyes as her mother handed over objects worth millions to men in elaborate vestments. The chalice was presented first, carried on a velvet cushion by priests in white robes. Cardinal Martinez held it up for assembled press to photograph, sunlight streaming through stained glass, catching the gold and garnets in ways that made the cup seem to glow with its own light. This chalice has served the Church for 929 years, the cardinal said, his voice carrying through the cathedral. It has been held by saints and sinners, by popes and common priests. It has been hidden, protected, nearly lost, and it has been found again by a woman who understood that some things are worth more than money. Elena felt tears burning her eyes. This was real. This was happening. She'd actually done this found treasure, negotiated with the Vatican, secured her daughter's future, while ensuring sacred objects would be properly cared for. The reliquary came next, then the crucifix, each one presented with reverence and documented by dozens of cameras. The remaining pieces followed manuscripts, candlesticks, statues, each one a piece of the puzzle that had been hidden beneath the monastery for so long. After the ceremony, standing in the cathedral courtyard, answering questions from reporters who were surprisingly respectful, Elena felt Margaret's hand on her shoulder. "Your grandfather would be so proud," the older woman said quietly. "Benito always believed there was something valuable in that monastery. He never found it, but you did, and you did right by it." Rosa hugged her tightly, whispering in her ear, "Don't forget who you are, Mija. Don't let the money change the things that matter." That evening, exhausted from hours of public attention, Elena returned to the monastery with Sophia. The building looked different. Now she'd used some of the advance payment to start repairs. The roof no longer leaked. The boarded windows had been replaced with glass. The flooded courtyard had been drained and cleaned, revealing beautiful stonework that had been underwater for decades. But it was still their home, still the place that had sheltered them when they had nothing. "Mama, are we going to stay here?" Sophia asked as they climbed the stairs to their cell. Elena looked around at the stone walls, the narrow windows, the space that had seemed so desperate and frightening when they'd first moved in. "Do you want to?" "I like it here. It's special." "It is special." Elena pulled her daughter close. "Tell you what, we'll stay while we fix it up properly. Make it beautiful again. Then we'll decide if we want to live somewhere else or keep this as our home." Over the next year, Elena poured money and attention into restoring the monastery. She hired architects who specialized in historic preservation, contractors who understood how to work with century-old stone, artisans who could recreate the faded frescoes. The flooding proved fixable, a combination of better drainage, strategic waterproofing, and accepting that the ground floor would always be damp. But the second and third floors transformed into beautiful living spaces. High ceilings, Gothic windows, original stonework, cleaned and preserved. Elena kept their original cell intact, the space where they'd survived those first desperate weeks. She furnished it simply, left it as a reminder of where they'd started. But the rest of the second floor became comfortable living quarters. Real beds, real furniture, a kitchen with modern appliances, bathrooms with hot running water. The third floor she converted into something different, a museum displaying the artifacts she'd retained. Smaller pieces, less religiously significant, but still beautiful and historically important. She hired a curator, opened it to the public twice a week, charged modest admission that went toward maintaining the building. The monastery became what the monks who'd built it might have wanted, a place of preservation, education, reflection, sacred space. Not because of religious ceremony, but because of what it represented: survival against odds, beauty preserved through darkness, hope found in impossible places. The sales of remaining artifacts happened gradually over 2 years. Museums competed for pieces. Catholic universities established scholarship funds using items sold to their collections. Each sale was carefully managed: Patricia ensuring fair value, Elena ensuring pieces went to institutions that would display them properly. The final accounting, when all sales were complete and all taxes paid, left Elena with $47 million. $47 million, from buying a building for $1 and being brave enough to explore its depths. She didn't spend it the way people expected. No mansion, no luxury cars, no yacht or private jets. She bought the monastery outright, paid the city to clear any remaining legal encumbrances, and have the building removed from condemnation status. She established a foundation to help homeless families, providing emergency housing and job training. She funded scholarships for children of single mothers. She paid Margaret's mortgage off completely, the older woman protested, but Elena insisted. "You fed us when we had nothing. This is just returning kindness." She gave Rosa money to retire comfortably. Her aunt tried to refuse, but Elena was firm. "You told me about the monastery. You believed me when I found the collection. You deserve to benefit from that." She set up trust funds for Sophia's education and future, but not so much that the girl would never have to work or struggle. Elena remembered what Rosa had said about money changing people. She wanted Sophia to understand the value of things, not just their price. Jason from the convenience store appeared one day at the monastery, looking nervous. "I heard you're hiring for the museum." Elena hired him as assistant curator. He'd been taking night classes in history, working toward a degree he couldn't afford to finish full-time. She paid for his remaining tuition and gave him a job that used his education. Dr. Whitmore from Brown became a regular consultant, helping Elena understand the historical significance of pieces she'd retained. The professor's enthusiasm was infectious, her knowledge deep, and her respect for Elena's role as discoverer genuine. "You could have sold everything to private collectors and been twice as rich," Dr. Whitmore said during one of their meetings. "The fact that you prioritized public access and proper stewardship, that's remarkable." "I was homeless," Elena said simply. "I know what it's like to feel like the world doesn't care about you. I don't want people to feel that way. I want them to see beautiful things and know that hope exists even in dark times." The documentary aired on PBS 2 years after the initial discovery. Sacred Secrets, The Street Clements Discovery, told the full story: the monks, bringing treasures from Europe, hiding them beneath the monastery, the building's abandonment and condemnation, Elena buying it for $1 and finding what had been lost for decades. The filmmakers interviewed everyone: Elena, Sophia, Rosa, Margaret, Bishop Marchand, Cardinal Martinez, the experts who'd authenticated the collection. They showed footage of the restored monastery, the museum Elena had created, the pieces that remained in her custody. But the most powerful moment came at the end, when they showed Elena and Sophia standing in their original cell, the space left unchanged from their first desperate nights. "This is where we started," Elena told the camera, Sophia beside her, "when we had nothing but each other and hope that things might get better. I keep this room exactly like it was, to remember what desperation feels like, so I never take for granted what we have now. And to remember that treasure isn't always what you think it is," Sophia added, wise beyond her 11 years. "We found gold and jewels, but the real treasure was having somewhere safe to sleep." The documentary won awards. It brought more visitors to the museum. It inspired other people struggling with homelessness or poverty to keep fighting, keep hoping. But more importantly, it told the truth. The monks had protected sacred objects through centuries of upheaval. Elena had found them by accident while searching for shelter. The artifacts had saved her family, while she'd ensured they'd be properly cared for. Everyone had won. 3 years after finding the collection, Elena stood in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, Italy, watching as the crucifix she'd discovered was installed in a place of honor. The Vatican had paid for her and Sophia to attend the ceremony business-class flights, a hotel that was nicer than anywhere Elena had ever stayed. Treatment like she was someone important, rather than a woman who'd once been homeless. The basilica was breathtaking frescoes by Giotto covering the walls, stone floors worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims, the tomb of St. Francis himself in the lower level. And now, mounted on a wall where millions would see it, the crucifix the saint had actually held in his final days. A plaque beside it read, "Discovered 2024 by Elena Corvetti, beneath St. Clement's Monastery, Providence, Rhode Island, USA. Hidden by Franciscan monks in 1846 to protect it during European political unrest. Returned to Assisi through the generosity of Miss Corvetti and the Vatican's Sacred Art Preservation Initiative." Elena read it 3 times, each time feeling the surreal weight of seeing her name in a basilica that had stood for 800 years. "Mama, that's us," Sophia pointed at the plaque. "We're famous." "We're remembered," Elena corrected. "There's a difference. Famous is when everyone knows your name. Being remembered is when the good thing you did outlasts you." Cardinal Martinez approached them, moving through the crowd of clergy and tourists with easy authority. "Miss Corvetti, I'm so glad you could be here for this." "Thank you for inviting us, Your Excellency. It's the least we could do. This crucifix has been missing from Assisi for 178 years. Bringing it home is largely due to your willingness to negotiate rather than simply selling to the highest bidder." He looked at Sophia. "And you must be the young lady who helped discover the collection." "I mostly just watched," Sophia said honestly. "Mama did the brave stuff." The cardinal smiled. "Courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's exploring dangerous places. Sometimes it's just surviving when everything seems hopeless." After the ceremony, Elena walked through Assisi's medieval streets with Sophia, eating gelato and watching sunset paint the Umbrian hills in shades of gold and rose. They were a long way from the freezing night when they descended into a flooded chamber, terrified and desperate. "Do you think the monks would be happy?" Sophia asked. "The ones who hid everything?" Elena considered the question. "I think they'd be relieved. They protected those objects for as long as they could, but then the knowledge died with them. They probably worried the collection would be lost forever. Now it's safe, and people can see it and learn from it. Yes, I think they'd be happy." "And great-grandpa Benito, the one who bought the monastery first? He spent his whole life believing there was something valuable there. He never found it, But he was right. I think he'd be proud that his granddaughter finally discovered what he'd been looking for. They flew home 2 days later, back to Providence, and the monastery that was truly theirs now. The building had been fully restored, beautiful again, functional, a landmark rather than an eyesore. The museum drew steady visitors. The foundation Elena had established was helping families. But the thing Elena valued most was the security, not the money in the bank, though that was real and important. The security of knowing Sophia would never sleep in a car again, would never wonder where their next meal was coming from, would have opportunities Elena had never imagined. 4 years after finding the collection, Elena returned to Bellissimo for the first time since being fired. The restaurant had changed hands again. Marco's upscale experiment had failed within 18 months, and new owners had brought it back to its roots as a neighborhood Italian place. The new chef was younger, talented, clearly intimidated when Elena walked into his kitchen. "Miss Corvetti, I've heard so much about you. The pastry chef who found treasure." "I was just a pastry chef who got lucky," Elena said. "But I missed making desserts, missed the creativity of it, the satisfaction of feeding people. I was wondering if you might need help." The chef looked confused. "You want to work here? But you have millions. Which means I don't need the money. But I miss the work. Not full-time, maybe 2 days a week. I'd like to teach your pastry team some techniques. Contribute to the menu. For free, just for the love of it." And so, once a week, Elena returned to the kitchen that had once been her entire world. She taught younger chefs how to make perfect tiramisu, shared her mother's recipe for torta della nonna, created new desserts that honored traditional techniques while adding modern touches. The work satisfied something the money never could, the knowledge that she was still herself, still the person who'd learned pastry from her grandmother in a cramped kitchen in South Providence. The treasure hadn't changed that. It had just given her the freedom to choose how she spent her time. Sophia thrived. She attended a private school that challenged her academically, made friends with kids from all backgrounds, showed early interest in archaeology and history. She volunteered at the monastery museum on weekends, explaining artifacts to visitors with enthusiasm that reminded Elena of Dr. Whitmore. "When I grow up," Sophia announced one evening, "I want to find things that are lost, help tell stories that have been forgotten." "You'll be good at that," Elena said. "You've got experience you helped discover. One of the most important collections of the century." "I was 7. I mostly just held your hand and tried not to be scared." Sometimes that's all it takes. Being willing to hold on and keep moving forward, even when you're terrified. 5 years after the discovery, the Vatican organized an exhibition bringing together pieces from the St. Clement's collection. The chalice, reliquary, and crucifix were displayed alongside the artifacts Elena had retained, creating a comprehensive show of what the monks had protected. The exhibition opened at the Vatican Museums, then traveled to New York, London, Paris. Elena attended the opening in Rome, walking through galleries filled with objects she'd found in darkness beneath a flooded monastery. Pope Leo XIV made a surprise appearance at the Vatican opening, greeting Elena personally. He was younger than she expected, with the same sharp intelligence Cardinal Martinez had shown, but more warmth. "Miss Corvetti, your discovery has brought joy to millions. People who might never have seen these sacred objects now have access to them because of your willingness to share rather than hoard." "I was just trying to do the right thing, Your Holiness." The right thing is often the most difficult thing. You could have sold everything to private collectors and been far wealthier. Instead, you ensured these objects serve their true purpose, inspiring faith, preserving history, connecting people to something greater than themselves. After the Pope moved on to greet other guests, Sophia whispered, "Mama, did the Pope just thank you?" "I think he did." "That's so weird. A year ago, we were living in a broken building with no heat. Now, the Pope is thanking you." Elena pulled her daughter close. "That's the thing about life, baby. You never know what's around the corner. Sometimes it's disaster. Sometimes it's treasure. You just have to keep moving forward and hope for the best." The final piece of the collection was sold 6 years after the discovery. It was a small statue of Saint Clare, carved from ivory. Exquisite, but not particularly significant compared to the major pieces that had gone to the Vatican. A Catholic women's college in Wisconsin purchased it for their chapel, paying fair market value that would fund scholarships for 2 students per year in perpetuity. Elena attended the installation ceremony, watching as the statue was placed in a niche where students would pass it daily. The college president thanked her for making the sale possible. "This statue will inspire generations of young women. It represents what your discovery represents, that sacred things persist, that hope survives darkness, that women can be heroes in unexpected ways." After the ceremony, Elena walked the campus with Sophia, who was 14 now and thinking about colleges herself. "Would you consider coming here?" "Maybe. I like that they have a good history program." Sophia looked back at the chapel. "Mama, do you ever regret it? Giving so much away when you could have kept everything?" "Never. Not once." Elena meant it completely. "The money I kept is more than we'll ever need. The pieces I gave away are doing more good than they would have sitting in my possession. And I get to sleep at night, knowing I did right by the monks who protected these things for so long." "Do you think they're watching? The monks?" "I don't know if that's how it works, but if they are, I hope they're proud. They kept these treasures safe for centuries. I found them and made sure their sacrifice meant something." 7 years after finding the collection, Elena stood in the monastery courtyard with a crowd gathered for a different ceremony. The building was being designated a historic landmark by the National Park Service recognition that it was architecturally and historically significant. The plaque being unveiled read, "Street Clements Monastery, built 1847 by Franciscan monks to protect sacred artifacts smuggled from Europe. Abandoned 1967 due to flooding. Purchased 2024 by Elena Corvetti, who discovered hidden chambers containing religious treasures now displayed in museums worldwide. Restored and reopened 2025 as a museum and monument to preservation of sacred art." Rosa stood beside Elena, now 80 years old, but still sharp. "Your grandfather would have loved this. He tried his whole life to make something of this building. You actually did it." "We did it," Elena corrected. "You're the one who told me about the auction. You're the one who believed me when I said I'd found treasure. I just made a phone call. You did everything else, explored a dangerous building, found hidden chambers, negotiated with the Vatican, restored this place, built something meaningful. You turned disaster into triumph." The ceremony concluded with tours of the museum. Visitors walked through spaces Elena had once explored by flashlight, seeing artifacts she'd photographed in darkness. The hidden chamber itself had been made accessible, cleaned, lit, preserved as part of the building's story. A guide explained to each tour group, this chamber was sealed for over 50 years. The woman who discovered it had bought the building for $1 because she was homeless and desperate for shelter. She risked her life descending flooded stairs to explore this space. What she found here changed her life and gave the world access to priceless religious artifacts that had been lost for generations. Elena listened to the guide tell her story and felt the surreal disconnect that never quite faded. That was her. That desperate woman had been her. The homeless mother, exploring by flashlight, had been her. But that was also the past. She'd survived, found treasure, secured her daughter's future, done right by objects that deserved proper care. She'd turned a $1 gamble into a legacy that would outlast her by centuries. That evening, after the crowds left and the monastery fell quiet, Elena stood in their original cell. She'd kept it unchanged, sleeping bags on the floor, the camping stove, the plastic bins that had held their meager possessions, a reminder of where they'd started. Sophia appeared in the doorway, now 15, and nearly as tall as Elena. I remember being so cold, wondering if we'd survive the winter. I remember being terrified every single day, wondering if I'd made the worst decision of my life buying this place. Best decision, though, turns out. Yeah, Elena smiled. Best decision. They stood together in silence, mother and daughter, survivors of circumstances that had tried to break them. The monastery breathed around them, stone and history and secrets that had finally been revealed. Somewhere beneath them, the hidden chamber sat empty now, its treasures claimed by museums and churches where millions could see them. The monks who'd protected those objects for centuries were long dead. Elena Corvetti, who'd bought this building hoping to make something of it, was long dead. But what they'd all protected, what they'd believed was worth saving, had survived. And Elena Corvetti, who'd bought a condemned monastery for $1 because she had nowhere else to go, had been the one to ensure their efforts hadn't been in vain. That was the real treasure, she thought. Not the millions in the bank, not the artifacts, or the recognition, or the documentary awards. The real treasure was knowing she'd survived the worst circumstances and come through with her integrity intact, that she'd had nothing and found everything, that she'd been given treasure and used it to help others. Victoria Sterling's words from that lifetime ago echoed faintly. "You were never family, Sarah. Just a waitress my son settled for. Wrong person, wrong story." But Elena had heard similar dismissals. People who'd looked at her and seen only a homeless woman, a desperate single mother, someone not worth attention or respect. She'd proven them all wrong. Not through wealth, though the money was real and secure and more than she'd ever imagined. She'd proven them wrong by staying true to herself, by doing what was right, even when it was harder and less profitable, by remembering that things sacred and beautiful deserved protection even when you desperately needed what they could provide. "Come on," Elena said to Sophia. "Let's go home." "We are home, Mama." Elena looked around at the stone walls, the narrow window, the space that had sheltered them when they had nothing. "Yeah, we are." They left the cell together, turning off lights as they went, securing the monastery for the night. Above them, the repaired bell tower rose against the star-filled sky. Below them, the empty chamber waited in darkness, no longer holding treasure, but still sacred, a space where desperation and hope had met, and hope had won. Elena locked the main door, tested it twice out of habit, and walked with her daughter across the courtyard to their restored living quarters. Real home now, not just survival shelter. Beautiful space filled with comfort and security, and the knowledge that they'd earned every bit of it. The monastery had saved them. They'd saved the monastery. And somewhere, Elena believed, the monks who'd first built this place and the grandfather who'd believed in it were watching with pride. She'd bought it for $1. She'd found treasures worth millions. But the real miracle wasn't the money, it was that she'd been brave enough to explore the darkness when everyone else had given up, that she'd looked at a condemned building and seen possibility, that she'd descended into flooded chambers when safety would have meant staying on the surface. Sometimes treasure finds you in the darkest places. Sometimes hope appears when you've lost everything. Sometimes a $1 gamble changes your entire life. Elena had learned all of these truths, and now, every day, she helped others learn them too through the foundation, supporting homeless families, through the museum displaying sacred art, through the simple act of sharing her story with anyone who needed to hear it. The monastery lights glowed warm against the February darkness. Inside, Sophia did homework at a real desk in a heated room. Outside, the restored bell tower stood silent, waiting. Elena looked back once before going inside. The building that had seemed like a desperate mistake now looked like exactly what it was. Home, sanctuary, the place where everything had changed. She smiled, feeling gratitude so deep it was almost prayer, and went inside to the life she'd built from ruins and faith, and $1 worth of impossible hope. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.